Chapter 11. Wherever they burn books, they will also, in the end, burn human beings. Heinrich Heine, German poet. Over 1 week later, and Anna still wasn't speaking to me. She blames us for what Peter did, I said to Fritz as we walked to school. It's like we're not even friends anymore. You're not. Fritz spoke sharply at first, then drew in a deeper breath. Just be patient, Goethe. Their family is in a lot of trouble, but that's not my fault. But you don't know what that's like to face the Stasi. Even after a week, he hesitated before naming them, and I wondered if the bruise they'd given him was nothing compared to the other wounds that maybe couldn't be seen. Anna understands it now. If they told her to avoid our family, then that's what she's going to do. It's her only choice, really. If they told you to avoid me, would you? I asked him. Fritz chuckled and rubbed my head. Avoid you? Don't be silly. You and Mama are the only reasons I'm still here. I laughed along with him, but not really. I knew a part of him had meant exactly what he said. In the days since coming back from the Stasi, something about Fritz had changed. He was working fewer hours, or maybe not even working at all. I wasn't sure. He blamed his mood on the rainy spring weather, but I felt certain there was more to it. He was spending more evenings at the youth clubs, playing table tennis, and had gone to the theater on a couple of nights with his friends, even though he admitted the movies weren't much for entertainment. I did notice him combing his hair more carefully before he went out. Maybe he had a girlfriend. I hope she liked moodiness, because that was also a part of the new Fritz. Since I didn't have Anna for company, and since I figured making friends with anyone else would just infect them too, I took up reading and went through books so quickly that the librarian said she wondered if I would end up reading all the books in the library that the library contained. I doubted that. I made it a point to avoid the books that sounded too preachy, although I did check them out now and then in case the Stasi wanted to add my book choices to their secret files. And there weren't many books I really wanted to read anyway. A lot of the shelves that had once been filled were empty now, because books made people think. The GDR, German Democratic Republic, wanted to be sure it was their kind of thinking. Remember, they're in the East. Everything they do is controlled. Mama seemed to like the idea of me reading since she knew I'd be safe at home while she was at work, and she definitely liked Fritz doing more with his friends. She thought it meant we would eventually become more settled into our lives here. Mama still didn't know anything about the files. Both Fritz and I decided that wouldn't do her any good, nor did she understand that I had too much of my father in me to ever be settled in my life here. I was so much like him, in fact, that I hoped he would understand why I avoided the route to and from school that would take me past the platform. I figured if the Stasi were watching us, the worst thing was for them to see my father up there dancing out the lyrics to a song while I tried to figure out what it meant. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to figure it out. Whatever secret he buried before he left, I doubted it was worth risking the risk of digging it up. Our family didn't need any more trouble, and that was all we'd get if I did understand his dance. By mid-May, the whispers of summer were growing. Ooh, I love that one personification. School would be out soon. We'd have time to run and play like children should, and the weather was becoming so perfect that it felt like torture to be inside. Which was exactly my attitude late one afternoon as the temperature in the apartment became unbearably warm. I had opened the windows, and the breeze was perfect enough that I put on my shoes to go outside. Mama didn't like me to want her alone on the streets while she was gone, but this was the middle of the day. I felt perfectly safe. I had just finished buckling on my shoes when I heard a scuffle, like a scrimmage, like a little argument or a loud noise going on in Herr Krause's apartment next door. He wasn't alone. Something was wrong. Through the thin walls of our apartment, I heard him cry out for help, and I darted into the hallway. I wasn't exactly sure what I should do, but there were always people down the street. Perhaps I could run downstairs and bring someone back to help him. He cried out again, and then something crashed against the door. "Hold on," I yelled. "I'll get us, police!" His door opened, and Herr Krause collapsed on the floor in the hallway. His head was bleeding, and he was groaning. Two men followed him through the doorway, grabbed him by the shoulders. "We are the police," one of them snarled at me. "Go back inside." No, they were the Stasi. Remember the secret police. Their greenish-gray uniforms and the square and compass emblem, like little symbol, on their hats were dead giveaways to their identity. The question was, why had they come for our neighbor? "What has he done?" The question fell from my mouth, personification, before I could think of it. Surely they had made a mistake. Herr Krause wouldn't swat a fly without feeling a guilt, and they began dragging him away without answering. Two more Stasi left his apartment next. The smaller of them pushed past me to clear the way for his companion friend, who was carrying an armful of books, papers, and what appeared to be rubber stamps. It was a child's play set. I said I wouldn't just like it, in fact, so I couldn't think of any reason Herr Krause should have it, or why the Stasi would be interested if he did. Unless it wasn't being used for play. A gust of wind came from my open apartment door and blew into the hallway. It caught a few papers from the officer's hand and scattered them on the ground. Without thinking, I reached down to help pick them up. Sure enough, the printing on them was stamped with a message that looked as if it had been hand-carved into the stamp. "If I cannot speak what I think, then it is a crime just to be me." Despite its promises of a free press, the state controlled all printing machines and wrote the stories for the newspapers to publish. No citizen was allowed to write his or her own ideas if they differed from the state message, and certainly it was against the law to distribute, pass out, those writings. That's exactly what Herr Krause had done. He had carved a political message into children's toy stamps, and in doing so had risked years of imprisonment. From what I knew of Stasi prisons, there would be no public trial, and he would have no opportunity to defend himself. His interrogators, the people asking the questions, would stop at nothing before he signed a confession for whatever crimes they decided he had committed. In effect, Herr Krause's life was already over. "Give me that paper!" the short officer ordered me. Something about him seemed familiar, though I couldn't quite place him. "Let her read it!" Herr Krause shouted from the end of the hallway. "Why is the GDR so afraid of letting its people think?" But the officer shoved me against the wall, and in the moment when our eyes met, I whispered, I know you." He was a friend of Fritz's, or used to be years ago. When I was very young, he used to ride me around on his back like a pony. Didn't he remember that? Didn't he know me too? He reached for the paper, but for some reason I clutched it to my chest. He raised a hand and slapped me hard against the cheek. I gasped as it knocked the breath from me too. Then someone shouted, "That's my sister! Please stop!" Suddenly, Fritz was at my side. He apologized to the officers, then grabbed the paper from my hand. When Fritz went to give it to the officer holding me, his eyes widened. "Victor?" That was his name. I remembered it now, too. Victor. Clearly recognized my brother, too. But in an instant, his expression hardened again, and his grip on my shoulder tightened. Fritz reached out a hand to me, but Victor wasn't loosening his hold. I shuddered inside. Was I going to be arrested too? Fritz's voice remained calm. "Victor, let her go. For the sake of our friendship. Finish with the girl and come!" Victor's companion called. After a final squeeze on my shoulder, he shoved me toward Fritz and said, "The Stasi have no friends. You'll be joining us soon. You'll find out." Once they left, Fritz hauled me into our apartment and locked the door behind us. "What were you thinking?" he yelled. "I heard Herr Krause calling for help. Printing a paper can't be such a bad crime, is it? It is not up to us to determine his crimes or to help him." Fritz slumped onto the couch, closed his eyes, and massaged his temples. "Here's your temples." As if sudden headache had come on. In a quieter voice, he said, "Victor and I used to be friends. He was a good guy once." I sat beside Fritz, feeling as exhausted as he looked. "Is that what'll happen to you after you go to the military?" Fritz only sat up, stared blankly back at me, Yes, I think it's exactly what will happen. Chapter 12. Do not rejoice in luck. Do not hesitate in the storm. German proverb. Fritz and I agreed we shouldn't tell Mom about Herr Krause's arrest and the trouble I nearly gotten into there. She seemed happier lately, and neither of us wanted to ruin it for her. We're in a routine again, Mama often said at dinner. That is good. But the routine was starting to wear on me, and something about reading the stamped message from Herr Krause made me want to see my father again. It seemed like Papa would have said if he were here. It seemed like something Papa would have said if he were here. The next morning, I looked for him as I approached the crowded platform. It was Saturday, only a half day of school for us. Ooh, school's on Saturday. But my least favorite day to walk there because of the Western tourists who often come to the wall on the weekends. They took pictures, brought their binoculars, and stared into our world as if we either needed or wanted their pity. I hated that. They watched us helplessly, but did nothing for us. Then I stopped, as if I had just seen myself in the mirror for the very first time. Who was I to complain about them? Wasn't I guilty of the same thing, of staring helplessly and doing nothing about my own problems? The tourists couldn't do anything for me. Not even the powerful governments of the West could break through what they called the Iron Curtain. The Berlin Wall, right? The wall separating East Germany from West Germany. And everyone inside East Germany with any sort of influence stood shoulder to shoulder with Russia. No, there was only one person who could change my situation. Me. A couple of Grunzers were patrolling the wall. Remember, they're like the security guards this morning, but I didn't have their attention yet, nor did I care. I knew down to my toes that my father would be on the platform, and I wanted to see him. I didn't at first, but then as I kept walking forward, Dominic pushed to the front of the crowd and pointed to me. He gave a whoop I thought I could hear from where I stood, and then called down. Almost instantly, my father was on the platform too. He stared into his dance with he started into his dance with the digging, but the platform was far too crowded, and he didn't need to do it. I understood what he wanted, just not where. So I counted out 3 long and deliberate steps. Then, with only a peek his way, I knelt on the ground and drew a small X. X marks the spot. My father nodded back at me, and I hoped he understood what I wanted to know. The problem was that even if he did, how could he possibly communicate to me something as complicated as where I should be digging, or what sort of treasure I might be looking for? It had been risky enough for me to draw the X, and though I quickly brushed it out of my foot with my foot afterward, I still drew the attention of a couple of the guards in the tower who shouted down for me to walk on. I quickly obeyed and hurried away with my heart pounding. But it wasn't from fear. It was from excitement for what my father might do next. Only a few days later, I found out. On most school days, our teacher allowed us some time in the afternoon to quietly study with one another. And since it was near the end of school year, there was some important tests coming up, so she gave us more time to study than usual. Although Anna had successfully avoided being anywhere near me for weeks, this time the teacher assigned her to join my group, and the only spare seat was right next to me. I glanced sideways at her, but she did a good job of pretending not to notice. Anna, I whispered, can we talk? She answered by raising the book in front of her face so that no one, especially me, could see her. A sour-faced boy across from us snorted. Since when did she become too good for the rest of us? I kicked him in the shins, hard. When he started to complain, I slouched like I was preparing to kick him again, and I would have if necessary. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Anna lower her book just a little, and I was pretty sure that I caught the barest tint of a smile. Nearing the end of our group time, we were discussing the causes of America's Great Depression when Anna silently slipped a folded paper into my hand. All school kids know how to secretly pass notes, but this one surprised me. I wanted to thank her. No, I wanted to grab her shoulders and pull her into the tightest hug ever, But I didn't do either. Instead, I slipped the note between the pages of my folder and began counting the minutes until school ended. Once we were dismissed, I quickly found a quiet spot under a tree, and only then did I dare to unfold the paper. At first, what I saw made no sense. It was just a pencil drawing of an old building, square and made entirely of brick. There were 2 long windows in the front, but with no glass in them, except for jagged pieces in the corner. An old chimney ran up the side of the building, but the bricks were shaded darker, suggesting it was an addition to the original place. There were 3 ground-level window openings, too, but no door, so I might have been looking at the back of the building. That frustrated me. As hard as it would be to find any building in East Berlin, it would be nearly impossible to see the backs of them without wandering from yard to yard. Anna couldn't draw a circle, much less a building, so I knew this hadn't come from her. But there was no letter, no artist's signature, and no explanation of why I should have received it. Anna walked past me a minute later. I stuffed the picture in my folder and caught up to her. "Nothing's changed," she said. "Please go away." I will in a minute. Just tell me about the picture. I don't know anything about it." But she had to know, so I touched her arm and said, "Please, Anna, then I'll leave." She stopped, and I saw tears in her eyes. She looked around us, and then, in a voice so low I barely heard it, she said, "We have family in West Berlin. Someone told them about Peter's death, and they sent us a letter of consolation. This picture was in that letter with your first name on it, but I don't know why or where it came from." It was from my father. I was sure of that, and while it was less certain, I thought Dominic might have done the drawing. He used to be artistic, though I had no way of knowing if he still was. I started to tell her so, but she shook her head to cut me off and said, "Don't say anything, please. You don't want me to know why you got that." "I don't even know." She started to leave, but I added, "Anna, I want us to be friends." I thought I saw her soften, just for a minute. Then her face became stone again, until I barely recognized her as the girl I had once known so well. "I can't do any more favors. I hid the picture before my parents saw it," she said. "But you and I both know it means something. I can't do any more favors for you, Goethe. Next time I will tell someone." I backed away to let her leave. If she suddenly pulled a mask from her face, revealing a Stasi officer in disguise, I wouldn't have been any more surprised than I already was, because that's who it felt like I was talking to. And who knew? Maybe I was. I looked at the drawing one more time before setting off for home. Well, not directly home. Somewhere in East Berlin, this building was waiting for me. I needed to find it, and that is where I would dig.